Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bread of Life channel. I'm really excited to have Floyd FP here today. We're going to discuss the problem of evil. Floyd has a YouTube channel and he discusses a lot of things related to faith, religion. And so I encourage you to check out his channel. You can find the link in the description of this video. Floyd and I have spoken before and had a really good conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing from him on one of his top reasons for atheism. So, Floyd, do you want to kind of share an overview about the problem of evil?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on again. It's always fun being on your channel.
My pleasure.
So we're going to talk about the problem of evil. So I thought I'd just give a brief overview of what the problem of evil is and some of the issues around it. So the problem of evil, it's been around for centuries. It's not an old argument or problem. It's been around for many centuries. And it's basically the argument that an all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good God would not allow any unnecessary evil or suffering to occur. So that's called the logical problem of evil. And then there's another form of the argument, which is called the evidential problem of evil. And I think that's even more powerful. So it's just not that God wouldn't allow any evil to exist, but he wouldn't allow any gratuitous evil. And that's what we find, or that's what we apparently see in the world, that just not evil exists, but there's a horrendous amount of suffering and evil that exists, both from moral agents, mainly humans, and also from non-moral agents, such as animals, just natural disasters, hurricanes, typhoons, earthquakes, disease, famine, you name it. So, and this has been going on for millions of years. So it's just not that evil exists, but that there's a lot of it. And that would go contrary against an all-loving God. The logical problem of evil was best expressed by the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus. And just to paraphrase what he said, God either wishes to take away evils and is unable, or he is able and is unwilling, or he is neither willing nor able, or he is both willing and able. If he is willing and unable, he is feeble, which is not in accordance to the character of God. If he is able and unwilling, he is wicked, which is equally at variance with God. If he is neither willing nor able, he is both wicked and feeble, and therefore not God. So that's the basic idea behind the logical problem of evil. Now, so there's a misconception that I hear from time to time about the problem of evil, where people think that it's simply about why evil exists at all. So it's just not a problem for the theist who believes in God, but also for the atheist. And I think that's a misconception. The basic problem is how can there be all this evil with a loving God? So you need to have both things. You need to have the evil and God, and try to reconcile both. For the atheist, it's not a problem because we only have one side of the equation. We have evil and suffering, but we don't have God. So we don't need to explain why God would do that, because we don't think God is, part of the equation. So it's really more of an internal critique of theism, and a particular form of theism. The classic view of theism that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, and that sort of God is also considered part of the attributes of the Christian God as well. Christian God is considered to have those three attributes at all. So over centuries, many explanations have been given to resolve this problem, and that the term used for that is called Theodicy. So Theodicy it's a Greek word, theo, God, and it's dike, I believe, which is justice. So it's just an explanation for why God would permit such evil and suffering in the world. And throughout the ages, many theodicies have been offered. A common one is the free will defense, made popular by people philosophers like Alvin Plantinga. There's other ones such as the character building, soul making theodicy, that through suffering it builds our character and so forth. Another one is this: we live in a fallen world. Another one is that God is punishing us for our sins. That's another one. There's been other explanations, like apocalyptic explanations, like the forces of evil are currently ruling the world. So that's why there's so much evil and suffering, and eventually God will intervene and make everything all right. The latest trend is what's called skeptical theism. And that's kind of an odd term. When you think skeptical theism, you kind of think, what, are you skeptical of theism? Are you an atheist? Are you an agnostic? No, the term doesn't mean that you're skeptical of God existing, rather that you're skeptical of us human beings be able to know God's thoughts and God's plans. So God could have morally justified reasons for allowing evil, but us being fallible, finite human beings, we're not in a position to know what they are. The common analogy given for skeptical theism is, imagine that your neighbor across the street opens his garage, and from your front door you look into his garage and you see no cars there. So from that you can determine, oh well, there's no cars in his garage because the garage door is open. I can see there's no cars. So you're in a position to know that there are no cars in your neighbor's garage. But what if I said, oh, there's no insects in my neighbor's garage from my vantage point? I'm not in a good position because insects are so small. They could be hidden behind, the containers and all the other junk that people keep in their garage and so forth. So I'm not in a position to actually know whether there are insects or not in the garage, simply because I'm just simply too far away to know. And that's what a skeptical theist views with the explanations that God has for allowing evil in the world, that we're simply not in an epistemic position to know God's moral reasons for letting evil. So those are a few of the explanations given for the problem of evil.
Okay, so do you find any of those explanations good, or like, do you just find flaws with all of those explanations? What makes this, such like an unsolvable problem?
Yeah, I find shortcomings with all of them, and a lot of philosophers have written on all these theodicies. Like, for example, the free will defense, that's commonly used. The problem with the free will defense is, number one, it doesn't answer the problem of natural evils, and by evils I mean suffering, really. So the free will defense doesn't explain why there's earthquakes or disease or famine or hurricanes and typhoons and so forth. It doesn't answer that. And also, as far as an all-loving God valuing human free will, well, I don't think the Christian God really does that. I don't see where that's really in the Bible that much. We see, the God of the Bible is a God that intervenes on our behalf from time to time. And I think the idea of prioritizing free will over our well-being is evil in itself. If your child is running towards the street where he could be caught by the car, we're going to run over and stop them. We're not going to say, oh, well, we value our child's free will, so we're just going to let him run. No, we value his life over his free will, So, we intervene. So I would think, again, a loving God would do that as well. Other things like the soul building Theodicy, I always found that one very strange. Does suffering and hardship really build souls, really improve characters? I don't think so. I mean, we've seen cases like when children are abused. Do they come out stronger for that? No. Often, when they become adults, they'll reenact that abuse to their own children, and the cycle goes on and on. Is that how we raise our children? Do we want to make our children have difficult, suffering lives so we can build their characters? No, we want them to flourish and be happy. So I find the whole character building theodicy kind of strange. Skeptical theism. A lot of philosophers have written about that. One common objection to that is the Pandora's box objection, where if you're skeptical about God not telling us what his morally sufficient reasons are, we should be skeptical about anything. It implies global skepticism, and also it kind of makes us kind of brings on moral paralysis, where if there is no skeptical theism, basically says there is no gratuitous evil at all, that all the evil that we apparently see is not gratuitous. God has a reason for allowing it. Well, if that's the case, then should we stop any evil at all? If we see a child being raped and so forth, should we stop it or let it happen? Because if there's no gratuitous evil in the world, then we shouldn't stop any apparent evil we see. And some philosophers even say it even brings about epistemic nihilism, that if we're skeptical about God allowing apparent gratuitous evil happen, how can we trust anything that we experience or anything that God tells us? God could be lying to us and might have morally sufficient reasons for doing that. Now, in the Bible, God, it says God does not lie. So if we just trust that, perhaps he's not. But then we have to be skeptical about what the Bible says as well. And it's kind of like a domino effect. So I think they all have certain problems. I think one of the most significant problems with the problem of evil is that of animal suffering. Animals have suffered. If you're an evolutionist like me and believe in an old Earth, animals have been suffering for millions and millions of years, even before humans came on the scene. And they evolved in a way where they prey on each other. Right now, animals are ripping apart other animals just to survive. Larger fish are swallowing smaller fish, whole to eat and so forth. So they developed that way. I would think if there was an all-loving God, he would have designed us where we don't have to pray, we don't have to eat other animals to survive. Why do we need to eat at all? Why did he does God have to eat? No. So why do we have to eat? Why did he create us that we have to kill other life for us to survive? It seems kind of like a really cruel way of organizing the world. So I think animal suffering is probably the strongest example I can give as far as the evidential problem of evil. So
cool. Well, I'd love to have a discussion about each one of these objections that you mentioned, because I do think I have responses to the issues that you're bringing up. And the first one you brought up is that the free will defense doesn't really deal with the problem of natural evil like earthquakes and hurricanes and that kind of thing. And I do understand that perspective, but I think it comes from an overemphasis on like things on like, or like a commitment to naturalism, where we see these processes in nature as simply natural. But in actuality, there's a spiritual component to even the things that happen in the world, like hurricanes and earthquakes. And I do think they are connected to human behavior. And so I don't hold God responsible for natural disasters. In the Bible, God told humanity to rule over the animals, the earth, to fill the earth and subdue it. And so I kind of think of humanity as the governors of God's creation, or at least the earth. And so our rebellion against God has actually affected the way that nature behaves. So nature is like an unruly child. If you have a parent that is not guiding the child, then you have a child that's acting up, throwing tantrums. And that's basically how I view nature. As nature is essentially just throwing tantrums and following human example. We kill each other, so why shouldn't nature also kill? Nature is responding and reacting to the way that humans govern the world. And I think the biblical support for this, part of it comes from Romans chapter 8, where it says the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. So while we tend to think of nature as like, okay, these are just, we don't tend to think of it in spiritual terms, but I believe the world is all spiritual. And so there is a spiritual component to what happens in nature.
Well, do you think like the cause of earthquakes and typhoons and hurricanes and so forth, is that God's punishment because we sin? God sends those things as a consequence, or do you think there's some sort of chain reaction where humans sin and I don't know, that creates bad karma or something, which I don't know, affects the atmosphere, which then affects the tectonic plates, which then causes earthquakes or something like that? Or, is it a direct cause of humans doing something, which represents like a chain reaction? Or is it God's punishment or God's action because of what humans have done?
Yeah, I don't see it as God's punishment at all. I don't think God is punishing. I mean, he has done this in the past. I mean, there's clear in Exodus where God sends the plagues on Pharaoh and the land of Egypt. So there are times when God has used nature in that way. But what I believe now is that we are in an era of God's grace. God's grace has been poured out on all of humanity. And, God is in the process of reconciling the world to himself and not counting our sins against us. So I don't see God as bringing punishment through natural disasters. The way I understand it is how you explained it. The second thing you explained, where it's like human behavior causes reactions in nature. And I'm not saying like, oh, okay, if I sin today, there's going to be an earthquake. I don't think it's like that direct correlation, like, this city was sinful and so an earthquake came upon it or something like that. No, I don't see it that way. I see it kind of in a global aspect, like a global, where like from the time that humans rebelled against God, nature has not had, a good example to follow. It hasn't had the guidance that God wanted it to have through us governing, even the animals and all the things that he made. And even at the beginning, and this is where I'll go to talking about, and I don't, maybe I'll save the animal suffering till the last, because that's, part of, because that might be my views might be a little controversial there, but, in as far as animals eating each other, in Genesis, God clearly says that his intention, he gave all the animals plants as food. He did not give the animals or humans animals as food. So, and I'll just read that for those who are not familiar with it. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all of the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. So, things are not as right now, the state of the earth and the state of animal predation is not what God set up in the beginning.
So you believe God meant us all to be vegetarian, eating animals, and
yes,
yeah, I know some people hold that. Then I guess after the flood, God, I think after the flood, God actually tells us that we can start eating meat and so forth. And but I guess I take it that you're a young Earth creationist.
Yes.
Yeah, because that would make sense under young Earth creationism for sure. Where if you're a theistic evolutionist or evolutionist like me, or perhaps even a old Earth creationist, doesn't fit in well, because animals existed
right.
before humans came on the board. So, but if you're young Earth creationist, animals came about the same time as humans. So, all the suffering in the world came from the fall, from Adam and Eve's fall and so forth.
Yeah, and that's actually why I wanted to save the animal suffering to last, but since we're on it, let's do it. And that's because, as soon as I open my mouth to say I'm a young Earth creationist, I know I'm losing the majority of people who might watch, because, people tend to think that that's just a ridiculous idea. I will say this. I think it's possible that the globe, the Earth itself, is billions of years old, but that the creation of life and everything happened within 6 days. And I think so. I tend to hold a more literal, a more just, idea of young Earth and, not giving the Earth an old age. But I do think there's room for the Earth to be old, but I definitely don't think that, if we're reading the Genesis narrative, that we can fit millions of years of animal suffering into the story that's described here. So I do believe that we were created, in the same 6-day period as the animals. And so there was not millions of years of animal suffering. And even the animal suffering that exists right now is something that God cares about. And we have evidence from that in, Jesus said, 2 sparrows are sold for a penny, but, not one of them falls to the ground apart from the Father. And so it's a picture of God's care, even for the tiniest creatures. And I believe God is even reconciling and, bringing back to life every creature that has ever lived. And we get a picture of animal restoration, like in the book of Isaiah, where it talks about, a child will stick his hand into the den of a viper, and animals will lie down together. That the animals that are predators now are not going to be predators. That there won't be any more destruction in God's kingdom like that.
Yeah. Do you believe animals do experience pain, that they're aware of the pain, and they actually feel suffering? I mean, I certainly do.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and the science seems to be pointing us in that direction as well. The more developed their brains, the more they're aware of the pain and experience pain, and we see animals, they learn from it. If something hurts, they shy away from it. They don't do it away. For some reason, my cat is scared to death of my iron. If I pull out the iron,
Yes.
start the iron, it takes off. I don't know. Perhaps she bumped into it one day and got a little burned or something. I don't know, but she's scared to death of her iron. That's how we get her out of the room at night. We just pull up the iron and boom, she takes off. But some people have argued throughout the ages that animals are just mere machines, that they don't feel pain. That if you actually kicked one and it squeals, it's no different than a cuckoo clock, cuckooing at noon and so forth. Rene Descartes is famously had that position, that the animals are just mere machines. They lack souls and reason, so they don't feel pain. But I think that view is outdated and scientifically incorrect. But there are people today that even have a neo-Cartesian view on animals. One example was William Lane Craig in his debate with Stephen Law. He brought out some book written by another Christian apologist, not a scientist, but a Christian apologist, claimed that animals didn't have this third order awareness of pain, but because they don't have a prefrontal cortex, and that ended up just being factually wrong. Yeah, William Lane Craig was just flat out wrong about that. Biologists just said no, they do have a prefrontal cortex, and they are, so he was just wrong. And I think William Lane Craig backed off. I think he later admitted that he was wrong. But I think even today, as far as animal suffering goes, one example of horrendous animal suffering took place in Australia a year or two ago. There was a wildfire throughout the whole country, and they say an estimated 1 billion animals perished, and another large amount, was interrupted and so forth. Unimaginable suffering for animals. Now, I'm still trying to understand. So you think human sin kind of led that? You kind of view it like, imagine a table, and you keep on putting more and more things on top of the table, and and the table has a weight limit to it, and the more you put so much onto it, and then eventually it collapses. Because there's a weight limit, and you just kept on putting more and more weight on it, and then eventually it collapses. Is that kind of how you view it, where the sin of humans kind of builds until 1 billion animals in Australia perish? Is that kind of your view?
Well, I don't know about build up. It's more just that I'm not surprised when horrible things happen in nature, because I believe that all of nature has been affected by human rebellion against God and our failure to be good governors of the earth. And so, I don't necessarily think it's because, last year humans really sinned a lot and therefore 1 billion animals died. It's not, we've always been sinning, right? Our corruption has always been, affecting the earth and nature. And so I don't know that there's a direct correlation between one set of present human actions and the wildfire. It's just that nature is completely out of control because of the way that humans have behaved. And even, like I said, I believe that animals were all meant to be plant eaters. God didn't give them each other as food. He gave them every living thing that had the breath of life. He gave green plants and things for food. Now, but what have humans done? We started killing each other. Cain killed Abel. You've got, and then you've got a continuation of violence, even leading up to the flood. There was huge amounts of violence. And so I do think that had an impact on the animals, and animals became predators. And so, and then, yeah, so.
Well, I mean, do you think God has some sort of plan in that, though? I mean, wouldn't God have designed it that way? Why would human sins affect animals? Why would God make that connection? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I think it's because, and this is not an argument that I hear very often. I feel like the focus is often on free will, but I think there's more to it than that. God didn't just give us free will. He also gave us great responsibility. And so, God gave us responsibility to care for the animals. He, in Psalms, it says, the highest heaven belongs to the Lord, but the earth he has given to mankind. And so he gave us responsibility, and he doesn't yank it back every time we abuse it. And I think that is why, prayer has power here, because God doesn't just seize control of every situation when things go wrong. He waits to be invited into situations. That is why prayer is important, is because we are actually asking God to intervene. And so, when we don't ask God to intervene, he is, he is not seizing control of situations. And so, he has given us that responsibility. And some people are like, well, that's too big of a responsibility. You mentioned, well, if my kid is going out into the street, I don't just let him run out into the street. No, not when they're a child, right? But you don't continue to follow your child around after the age of 18 and make sure they cross the street properly, right? So, the way I consider it is like, and they wouldn't be happy with you if you did that. And so the way that I think of it is that God isn't treating us as children incapable of caring for themselves. He has given us real responsibility. He's given us real power, incredible power. And I think people underestimate the incredible amount of power that God entrusted to every human being. And so, I compare it, I made a video about this, like I compare it to like when I took my kids, to go on the bumper cars when they were little. Man, they were just having a great time, and they could make any decision. It didn't matter what they did with that car. It was completely safe, right? And some people want God to have made a bumper car world where like any decision we make will just, it's equal. It doesn't matter. There's no danger involved. And so, it's like, why didn't God make this bumper car world where, hey, none of our decisions really, matter one way or the other? Well, I did not trust my kids, right? When they were small, I wouldn't have trusted them with a real car and real responsibility and real power, real danger. I entrusted them. I did not really trust them, which is why I put them in a bumper car, right? And so, because their decisions, they were not, I didn't need to trust them. Now, they might have appreciated the bumper cars when they were small, but if I take my kids to do bumper cars right now, they're not going to like that. My son, he just got his driver's license, and he doesn't want to use that to drive a bumper car. He wants me to entrust him with real responsibility, real power. And I've done that, right? I'm letting him go out. Right now, he could take that car and he could ruin somebody else's life, right? He could drink and drive. He could, destroy lives. He could do any number of terrible things with the power that I've given him. But I'm choosing to trust him with that power. And I think it's important that he has that level of power and responsibility. I want him to have that. And that's the way that God has treated us. He didn't treat us like little children who couldn't be trusted and that, and give us fake power. Like, he didn't give us fake power. He gave us real power. And our choices really matter. And so I think God has given us a level of dignity that, like, some people just want to throw it away, and they'd say, well, I'd prefer the bumper car world. Well, you know what? I'm glad that God gave us the dignity and the power and the responsibility. And I honestly don't think, for the type of beings that God created us to be, that we would have appreciated, the bumper car world.
Well, I mean, don't humans, aren't humans trying to design a bumper car world, though? I mean, I think that's a good example. Look at cars today compared to cars in, let's say, the 1950s. Cars today, they have airbags, they have backup cameras when you go in reverse. I mean, they're great. I love them. We just bought a new car, and if you take your eyes off the road, it beeps at you.
Wow.
And this is all new features of the new cars. It even, if you pass the lane, if you go on the lane, it beeps at you. There's all these features, for our safety, and we have new laws. In the 50s, you didn't have to wear seatbelts. I remember, I forget when the law came about. I'm not sure it was the 70s or 80s and so forth. You had to wear a seatbelt, and if, like, a cop pulled you over and you weren't wearing your seatbelt, that would be an extra fine on top of that. And I remember when that first went out, I didn't wear a seatbelt. My dad never wore a seatbelt and so forth. But then the law came about, and then you slowly started to wear them. And I remember, you go to the doctor's office, and your doctor would ask you if you wore your seatbelt, and my first answer was, yeah, some of the time I do. But now every time I drive, I start the engine and I put on my seatbelt. That's a required thing. And it seems like, we're learning the hard way, right? We're learning these lessons the hard way. But you think God could have, gave us this technology or warned us ahead of time to kind of help us, to be a teacher for us. It's okay. You have this new responsibility. You have cars now. Okay, there's all these new dangers on top of that now. Here are some guidelines. Here's here's technology and so forth to make it better. But God never does that. We have to over years and years of trial and error and great suffering and so forth. We're improving things. Same thing with medicine, for example. Medicine keeps on improving now for heart disease and cancer and stuff like that. Well, God could give us the cure for cancer if he wanted to. He could take it away himself, but no. We have to do the human effort to do that. We have a family friend. He was a research doctor at the University of Pennsylvania, near where I live. And he researched, he was a research doctor for cancer. He researched cures for cancer and so forth. And at 52, he died. And what did he die of? He died of cancer. And then his wife died 2 years later. cancer as well. So now their kids are orphans now. God could just step in and give us the cure, but we have to do hard work, and we still have a long way to go and so forth. But I think it's this abductive reasoning. What makes more sense, that there's a God that's kind of revealing little things over decades and decades of how we can cure cancer, or is there no God at all, and we're just on our own, and we have to figure out how to overcome that. And that's not only just with disease, but also what we're doing to the environment and our nutrition, and how much we exercise and how much sleep we get and how much stress we're putting on our bodies, and all those things. We have to figure out all that. And that seems to be, we seem to have better results with that than, I guess, praying and so forth. Maybe praying will help us settle down a little so we can focus on those things, perhaps. But I don't know. It seems like God could help us, give us the answer more,
Yeah. Well, I do think that God reveals things to people. Yeah, he doesn't, give us all the cures immediately, but I do think when people align themselves with God, that God and ask God to intervene, God does heal cancer miraculously. And I would say, and I just want to say, like, as I kind of go into this aspect of it, that as a Christian, I deal with the problem of evil on a regular basis. And I think I actually have a harder time with it than, people who don't believe in God. Because, I mean, like you said, you can just kind of say, well, or God doesn't exist, and then you don't really have to deal with the problem of evil. But if you believe and, in this loving creator, as I do, and in addition to that, I believe he's a creator who intervenes when we ask him to. Actually, the problem of evil becomes extremely difficult on a daily basis, because, of course, there are people that I ask God to intervene for, and I don't see the immediate effect. I've had, people in my life die of cancer. I've had, I've prayed for people in difficult situations and not seen God intervene in the way I want him to. And that's really, really hard. And I don't have the answer to that. So the problem of evil is something that I deal with constantly. And especially when I've seen God do miracles. And so when I see God do a miracle in one scenario and I'm like, yay, excited. And then the next week I pray for someone and I don't understand why that person doesn't get miraculously healed. That is very difficult to deal with. It's probably one of the most difficult things I've dealt with in faith. And it's just, it's an ongoing battle. But with regard to, like, well, why doesn't God just solve cancer? Well, or why didn't God, tell us, warn us in advance or something? I think, what is the problem of cancer boiled down to? It's related to the problem of death, right? We don't want people to die. And God did give a warning in the beginning. He warned Adam and Eve not to eat from this tree. And if they ate from the tree, they would die. And so all of humanity has been experiencing this death in various ways. So cancer is just one of the many ways that we're experiencing the fruit of our rebellion. But God has already provided a solution. So God has provided a solution for cancer. It's Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the solution for cancer and for every other thing that could possibly kill a human being or cause us to die. For every animal that dies, Jesus Christ is God's solution for that. And so, God has provided more than a seatbelt, because a seatbelt doesn't always save, but Jesus Christ always does save. And so those who are trusting in him, everyone is alive to God. So that doctor didn't die of cancer, because Jesus Christ is, alive and is bringing life to people who have had cancer.
Well, I guess that's why I have trouble with, because that's what I'm not experiencing. I'm not seeing that. I think that was when we first talked. That was on my list of uh, what would convince me to be a Christian. If Christians were thriving more than non-Christians, if we saw Christians overcoming cancer at a greater percentage than non-Christians, then I think people would look at that, saying, hey, and also, I think a good evidence for Christianity would be, a good test for Christianity would be that becoming a Christian would reverse the effects of the fall. That there'd be no more thorns and thistles in your yard, in the Christian, in the Christian's garden. That Christian mothers would not have painful childbirth. And all the effects of the fall would be reversed. But I don't think we see that at all. I think it's in Ecclesiastes. It says, rain falls on both the wicked and the righteous. And I think, and that's what we see. Hardships as well as good fortune are occurring to both. So I simply I simply don't see that in general revelation, which is natural revelation, the world that we experience. We read on Psalm 145, 8-9. It says, "The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and compassion is over all that He has made." So, over all that He's made, just not humans, but animals and everything. But again, I'm not seeing that. Even Jesus said, look at the lilies of the field, look at look at the birds and so forth. God takes care of them. Is God taking care of them? Again, I guess perhaps being a young Earth creationist, the history of suffering is only down to 6,000 to 10,000 years. But if you believe in old Earth, we see a lot of suffering and so forth. So it's hard to reconcile Psalm 145 with what we experience. And also, I think one thing that God could have intervened, and this is something that the Jewish people are really wrestling with, is the Holocaust, the World War II Holocaust that has shaken the faith of a lot of Jewish people. And I understand a lot of Jewish people are kind of cultural Jews now, where many of them are kind of atheists. They've lost their faith. But Jewish rabbis and theologians have come up with Theodicies to help try to explain the Holocaust. One ultra-Orthodox rabbi even wrote that Hitler was sent by heaven, and Hitler was good because God sent Hitler to make the Jews repent for their sins. And he even went on saying, Jews should not be marrying Gentiles and so forth. He's ultra-Orthodox. But that's the extreme that I've seen to try to justify this, where they even said Hitler was a godsend. And, and I read that like, well, I mean, it just seems like people at all costs are just trying to, defend God to what would happen. But, that would have been a perfect opportunity for God to intervene, where 6 million Jews were slaughtered, and it simply didn't happen. So that really has shaken the faith of the Jewish community.
Yeah. Well, I certainly understand that, and I don't have an answer for the Holocaust, as I don't have an answer for many of the evils that happen in the world. the specific evils that happen. But I wanted to go back to the verse you picked out from Psalm 145, because, Floyd, that is a verse that verse bothered me for at least 5 years. I early on in my Christian walk, I read that verse and I just stopped right there and I said, Lord, I want to believe that you are good to all. I want to believe that you have compassion on all you've made. But when I look at the world, I don't see that. And I just remember actually crying, weeping about that, just the fact that I wasn't seeing God's compassion and goodness to all people. But I feel like God I had specific accusations against him for, particular places and situations in the world. And, some of those places God ended up taking me to and showing me himself, showing me what he was doing to intervene in the places that I didn't think God was there. And so finally, after about 5 years of really wrestling with that particular verse, I finally said, okay, God, you know what? From now on, I'm not going to believe what I see with my eyes. I'm going to believe what this says. I believe that you are good. I've seen that you are good. I can't see how you're working in every situation around the world because I'm not there. But when I have gone to the places that I accused you about, I have seen what you're doing there. And so I'm just going to trust in you from now on. And I do think God is doing a lot more than people give him credit for. I believe he's doing more miracles on the earth today than all of the miracles done in the Bible. And, you said you hope, if you saw that Christians were overcoming cancer at a greater rate or something like that, it might convince you, but you don't see that. Well, I don't know how many studies have been done on that. That would be a pretty hard thing to do a study about and find out. I mean, I don't even know if anybody would be able to get the funding to do such a study, but I think there's a lot of things that are going on in this world, and God is doing a lot of miracles in the world that are not known because these are not the kind of things that are often reported. So, yeah, I just think we greatly underestimate what God is doing to intervene in the world.
Yeah. Another thing that troubles me is with all these Theodicies, they all seem ad hoc, and there's so many of them. It just seems like humans are just trying to guess the mind of God. What is God thinking? Oh, perhaps it's this, perhaps perhaps that, perhaps it's goodwill. As far as animal suffering, there's many different viewpoints to one I mentioned before, that animals don't feel pain, that they don't suffer, which I think is nonsense. To another theology is, God will make it up to animals, and animals go to heaven too. Some people hold that position as well.
Yeah, I do.
They've even taken apart God's attributes to justify that. Again, the three attributes are omnipotent, which is all powerful; omniscient, which is all knowing; and omnibenevolent, which is all loving, all good. And different theologians have reduced those attributes. For example, omniscience. There's a position called open theism.
Yeah.
Where they say God doesn't necessarily know what the future is going to be. He doesn't know the actions of the free will agents and so forth. So you have open theism, which limits God's omniscience. You have process theology, which limits God's power. And then you have a view that God is more hands off. It seems like you kind of mentioned that, where God just kind of lets, like a deistic God, where God omnibenevolence only goes so far. He limits that as well. So like all three attributes have been reduced to kind of deal with this problem, as well as, the other side, which we talked about, is, reasons why God has all those attributes, but he has other reasons for allowing suffering and evil and so forth. But it just seems to be all over the board. And I think I think if to settle the matter, if it is the case, it needs to be revealed by God. God needs to tell us. And I think that's another argument I have against skeptical theism, that, skeptical theism is God has morally sufficient reasons, but we're not in a position to know what they are. So we're skeptical, just like I said, if I looked into the garage across the street and I said there's no insects there, you would be skeptical of me, because it's like, how would you know, Floyd? You're across the street, you can't see insects on the ground across from there. But God could tell us. God could reveal us the reasons and so forth, and this way God could reveal the cure for cancers and things like that. So all these theodicies are just humans trying to read the mind of God. And it's humans just stumbling and so forth. So that's why I'm kind of discouraged by all these theodicies. It's just human guessing. The real if there is a real answer, God needs to tell us. God needs to reveal it to us. And humans, us humans, we need all the help we can get. If there's an all-powerful, all-loving God who can help us, I want that help. Life can be difficult. I think both of us are kind of fortunate. We live in nice homes. We're able to feed our families. We're able to enjoy life for the most part. But we have hardships as well. But it's nothing compared to a child in Africa starving to death, or a fawn that's dying slowly from a wildlife fire, only to end up dying. God could help them, and we don't even know about it. Something that us Westerners many aren't aware of is I'm a meat eater, and I've seen some documentaries of what happens in the slaughterhouses, of how cows are killed, and how chickens are killed and so forth. And we don't see that. We just go to the supermarket, and all the meat is laid out nicely, all butchered for you, and we just take it home. We didn't have to kill those animals, so forth. I think hunters who actually go out and shoot the animals, so forth, have more courage than I do to be able to do that. But again, is it necessary? In a naturalistic world, it makes sense, but in a theistic world, if God actually cared about all that He has made, according to Psalm 145, I find that difficult. Another thing that's discouraging, a pig is called pork, a cow is called beef. I guess a chicken is called poultry, and so forth. Where by giving them names, they're no longer sentient beings; they're just food products. We give them different names, so we don't. A deer is called venison. And so forth. It kind of takes away the reality of we're killing other animals, to make it better. And some moral philosophers has even promoted veganism or vegetarianism. That's cruel to eat animals, and I kind of lean that way. But I still eat meat because I eat whatever my wife puts in front of me at dinner time. That's what I eat. But hopefully over years, I know they're starting to have more plant-based food and so forth. You can get like plant-based, like hamburger and sausage and stuff like that. And I think they're even like starting to develop synthetic meats and so forth. That might be a solution. I hope it goes in that direction. And maybe
Yeah.
like synthetic meat might even be better than natural meat. Who knows? But who knows what that will bring? They could invent it, and then like 20 years later, they discover it causes cancer. Who knows what the result will be? But
Yeah.
I hope that that humans will work more to produce a better world for not only us but for all sentient beings. But again, I think it's a human effort, and if God can help, I'd appreciate his help. If he can tell us how to do it, great. But he's not telling us how to do it. We have to do a lot of hard work and a lot of study and a lot of trial and error and a lot of failures to progress. For God has all the answers, and he could, God could be our cheat sheet.
Right. But do you give your kids a cheat sheet when they go to school? Or do you want them to learn and grow and discover things for themselves?
Yeah, well, I want them to learn. I certainly don't want them to cheat, but I'll make sure my daughter has a good computer, that that she has, that she's able to buy the books,
right.
that she's able to have tutors if she needs, extra help and so forth. I don't let her stumble, and I provide her all the help that I can offer her. One thing I don't do is make her life more difficult. So I don't think it's like, all right, I want you, I want you to do this, but I don't want you to use the internet, or I'm not going to give you a computer or stuff like that. I mean, nowadays I think kids have to have a computer. I think to do their schoolwork. They email in papers and so forth. It's becoming more computerized. I want to give my child the best possible resources I can give, but I'm a limited human being, and our resources are limited, but for God there are no limits. Think of when Jesus fed the 5,000 or 4,000, the fish and so forth. Mm-hmm. Where did they come from? Did he just poof them out of thin air? Mm-hmm. I mean, God did that with creation, right? He created the whole universe out of nothing. Perhaps those fish that he fed the 5,000 with were created out of nothing. Or I guess perhaps he could have plucked them out of the ocean, I guess. So now there's 5,000 less fish in the ocean than there were. But again, God being all powerful, he could easily replenish them.
Well, Floyd, maybe he wants to use you to bring, 5,000 loaves of bread for, the starving children in Africa that you mentioned, but you're not on board with him. You're fighting against him rather than working with him and allowing himself to allowing God to work through you. Another thing with regard, there's a lot of stuff that you said that I have responses to. I was just trying to, let you get all the ideas out. But with regard to those who are suffering terribly, like you mentioned, starving people, let's talk about some other horrible things. Women getting raped by ISIS repeatedly, just the most horrible things that you can imagine happening in the world. I think one important testimony to take into account is the sufferers themselves, because what I've noticed is a lot of people who have trouble with the problem of evil are people who haven't really experienced that much of it. More of, people with lives like yours and mine, where maybe we've experienced some troubles, but we haven't experienced the worst evils that humanity has to offer. And so, I mean, I can only offer anecdotal evidence, but I've known some people who have suffered very greatly. And they didn't think that life wasn't worth living or that God wasn't loving because of those sufferings. So if the sufferers themselves are still able to give God glory and say what God has done is worth it, the life, the beauty, the goodness, the hope that we have in God is worth that suffering, then I don't know if our testimony as non-sufferers is very weighty.
Well, the fortunate thing is probably those sufferers are experienced like better now, so they overcome with that. But what did they really learn from the suffering? Was it really necessary? Did do they have better characters for it now, or are they just relieved that it's over with? You said that I'm against God, but I'm not. I think if God exists, I'm with God. If God's in the same motivation that I have of making life better for all people, so I don't think I'm against God in that respect. And I'm certainly not standing in his way, nor could I stand in his way to keep him from doing that. But I think if God exists and he has that goal, then I share the same goal as God. So I don't think I'm in his way to that. I just don't believe in the metaphysics that's involved with with religion. But but I think we're one way or another we're all in the business of providing a better world. We want a better world for our families, for ourselves, for our fellow human beings. And and it extends to animals and everything as well. And whoever can help, and they do help, is appreciated. I'm a limited human being. Could I do more? Of course, I could do more. I'm a limited human being. I have limited resources where God is not limited in any way, and perhaps God could be a better project manager if he wants humans to do it. Well, he can just be the project manager. He can just tell people, okay, you go this and you do that. You're responsible for that, and you buy these planes and we're going to drop ship food over to Africa to feed these people. And he can be the CEO of the planet, where we don't have that now. We have flawed human governments. Some countries we can't help because there's a dictator that's in control of the country, and you see what happens to missionaries when they go to some of these countries. They get kidnapped or killed, or or worse. That's a problem as well. If God was in charge of everything and truly loving and wanted to know and was looking out for our best interests, then we wouldn't have these problems, I think.
Well, I mean, and that's the key. Is God in charge of everything? And I don't think he is, because like I said, I believe that he has given the earth to human beings to govern. And so he's not in charge of everything. He has made you and me and the other people of the world the project managers. And so he does not yank back the power and responsibility he gave us every time we don't do it according to his wishes. He has given us guidance and even came himself and experienced our lives and our suffering. He came and experienced that personally, and he showed us how to live. He showed us how to love and our enemies. And I do think that is the path to a better world, is living the way that Jesus taught us and showed us to live. So, and then what did you, we were talking about, you talked about the omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. And I would stand strong with the omnibenevolence, but I'm not sure where we, got the idea of, these, like, necessarily God knows everything, including the future. when I read the Bible, and so I lean toward open theism, because when I read how God interacts with people in the Bible, it often seems as if God doesn't know what is always going to happen in the future. It seems he knows some things. And, so I think he has, a working knowledge of the future, but that it seems like, I mean, the Bible would be completely absurd if God actually knew everything. It would be like he was just condescending to us when he says, well, if you do this, then I'll do this. And, the different ways that he interacts with human beings throughout the Bible. So I definitely lean toward open theism. And that's not, that is just from the way that I experience God when I read the Bible. But with the omnipotence, having the power to do something, well, God has chosen to use his power to set up the world as it is. And, we may not like the way he's set it up, but he has set it up in such a way that he doesn't have all the power. Yeah, if he really wanted to, sure, he could yank back all the power he gave us and just take complete control. But God has actually set up the world where other beings beside himself have power. So his power is limited. And so he could ultimately be omnipotent if he wanted to be, but he isn't using that power to be omnipotent. He has given you real power and me real power and a bunch of other beings real power, including spiritual beings. And they affect the way that things happen in the world. And that's one aspect that we haven't even mentioned, but you did mention it. I really liked, you gave a really good summary of different Theodicies, and you included one that I actually think that all of the ones that you mentioned have some truth in them. But I like that you mentioned the warfare one, because we are in, this world is a battle zone. There are spiritual beings that are working for evil. And so we have to be aware of that as, we're experiencing suffering and evil, that it's not all about what God is doing. God does intervene, but there are other spiritual beings with real power that also do things.
Okay. I think that's everything I have. I'm sure there's a lot of writings on the problem of evil that people could read. I don't have any books in mind to kind of from Christians who support it, but I'm sure there's plenty of books. I mean, like C.S. Lewis wrote a book dealing with that. But if you want to learn, if you want to read some books on my side of the fence, so to speak, Bart Ehrman wrote a book called God's Problem, which deals with the problem of evil, and that's the reason he gives why he's an atheist now. Bart Ehrman was a evangelical fundamentalist Christian who, over time, lost his faith and is now an atheist. And he wrote a whole book on it called God's Problem. And there's a new book that just came out recently, edited by John Loftus, called God and Horrendous Suffering. He didn't write all of it. There's chapters where he wrote stuff, but other scholars and philosophers wrote chapters in it as well. So that's another book that people could read to learn about that. But I'm sure there's many more books and articles that people could read on the subject.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Floyd. And I just want to say hi to people in the chat here, and thank you for your participation. Jungle Jargon, Ben Roberts, Harry Stark, Nidamos, Uber, Janet. Thank you guys all for being here. And I guess, I don't know if any of the people, I'm trying to scroll back, but thank you guys for your participation. Jungle Jargon, I don't know if I mentioned you. Jamie, Alex, God bless you all. And, but Floyd, did I offend you by saying you were against God? Because I don't think I meant it in the way that you took it.
It did bother me a little bit, but I know what you meant. That,
because I don't
yeah.
mean that you're like purposely being an evil person, or like that you're not doing anything good for the world, or anything like that. You know, what I meant is that, like, God could be using his power through you to do things. Okay, you don't believe in the metaphysical stuff, but I do. And so I don't think we have a shortage of miracles. I think we have a shortage of miracle workers, people who are willing to align themselves with God and ask to be used by God in that way. And okay, not every miracle that I want to happen happens, but I do see that God does do miracles, and he does them through people. If you look in the Bible, every miracle that is done in the Bible is done through a person. And so, you've got the parting of the Red Sea. Moses took out his staff and he put it into the sea, and the sea parted. Everything that God does, he uses people to do it. And so I just meant that, right now you're, not being one of those people that's, willing to be used by God in that way, because you're not like connecting with him on that way and trusting in him and asking him. Do you think that's fair or not really?
Well, I think God can use the non-believer as well as the believer to for his ends. Particularly if if you're a Calvinist, God's in control of everything. So he controls our wills as well. So God would be using me for his ends as much as you, in regards to that. But of course, I don't believe that God's exists to control ourselves. It's really up to us. I mean, that's the only way. When I was a Christian, I had I was trying to keep my faith, and I had a very liberal view of Christianity, and I was trying to reconcile that. I was trying to make sense out of Christianity, and I thought, yeah, God exists through people, and when we help people, when we offer charity and so forth, that's an expression of God. But at that point, God becomes a metaphor for those things, and perhaps it's stronger if you actually believe that God is real, so forth, rather than just a metaphor. Maybe it motivates people more, but I guess for me, I don't need that. So
yeah, well, I think God is more than a metaphor. I definitely agree with you that God is using unbelievers as well as believers. I don't think he's using them by controlling their wills. I don't believe in Calvinism. I find Calvinism to be really far from the understanding of God that I have, and even from the understanding of God as I see him depicted in the Bible. But I definitely believe that, with natural things like medicine and technology and science and things, God is, and even just acts of kindness, God is able to, have his purposes fulfilled by people who don't believe in him. And, good and beautiful things can come from people who don't believe in him.
he did use Judas, right? He used Judas to have Jesus betrayed and crucified, right? Yeah.
Well, do you think God chose Judas for that purpose? I don't really see that in the scripture.
Well, doesn't it say that the devil entered Judas?
Yeah.
So, you think Judas invited the devil in him, or
I think Judas became subject to the devil because of choices that he made, and the way that he was living and thinking, that he opened a door. So I don't think Satan was forced on him, or that this was God's doing.
so you think God sending Jesus down to earth was a reaction to humans rather than something that he kind of foreordained?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I think there's some scripture that, could point to this was the plan from the beginning. But I don't know that it was like a plan that was necessary if humans hadn't rebelled. So, that one I kind of leave as a mystery. But I do believe that Jesus's coming and sacrifice and reconciling us to God became necessary because of human rebellion, and that human rebellion was not God's will.
Yeah. Well, I guess we could talk about the Adam and Eve story. I think the Adam and Eve story has a lot of problems itself, but the way I view it is, God put a loaded gun in the middle of a child's playroom. It was only a matter of time till some kid picked it up and fired it. And you don't do that. Again, it seems like, if you believe in the free will defense, you're saying God prioritizes men's free will over their safety. And I think that is evil in itself. You don't do that. You account for the safety of your loved ones, and you protect them. And it's worth denying their free will to do that.
Floyd, but what if he has accounted, and I believe he has accounted for your safety through Jesus Christ? You are safe, and so is everyone in the world. We have a safety net, that is Jesus Christ.
Well, again, it doesn't seem evident to me. I see too much suffering and so forth to accept that.
Yeah. Well, is it possible that without the suffering, and you kind of mentioned this as a Theodicy too, but that the highest good could not be achieved? Like one thing that I think about is that, if maybe what needed to happen is for us to experience the true result of what it means to rebel against God, so that we could be fully and completely convinced that actually God being sovereign, God being king is a good thing.
Well, it's certainly learning a lesson the hard way. That's for sure. I think I don't think it's necessary. I think the purpose of myth, which I think a lot of the stories in the Bible are pure myth, as well as movies and fictional stories and so forth, are to move us and point us in the wrong direction. And I think that's what makes good art, right? And I think that is sufficient. And I think that's kind of like the role of these stories in the Bible. I don't think they're actually historical events. I think they're myths, and I think that is what guides us and so forth. And that's what Christians didn't experience these stories. They're reading it in the Bible as well, and it affects them and motivates them and sometimes changes them for the better and so forth. So I think that's enough. I don't think it's necessary for us to actually experience all this horrendous suffering. I mean, yeah, we are very fortunate, living in the West. There's another, I guess, I think you're bringing up the character building Theodicy here. A typical response to that is that the character building seems to be disproportional over humanity. It seems like minorities and women and so forth are getting a lot more character building experience than like a Western white male is experience. Think of the horrendous suffering African Americans have gone through, and also other ethnic groups, and women and so forth, the suffrage of women and so forth. So it seems like the character building experience seems to be very prejudiced, and it's not distributed equally among all humans. So that's one objection to the character building theodicy, that it's it seems like, do African Americans need more character building than white people? Things like, and do women need more character building than males, and so forth?
No, but I mean, the way I would respond to that is that you're assuming that only the people who are experiencing the suffering directly are getting character building. What I'm saying is, you, Floyd, right now, you're looking at the effects of those various forms of oppression on the world. And you're saying that's a bad thing. I don't think anyone should experience that. And that is contributing to your character building. And so, like, maybe we're not all getting, the equivalent amount of suffering, but, if we look at the words of Jesus and the promises that he makes much better promises to those who have suffered. He says, blessed are you who are poor. Yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who have been hungry. You will be filled. Blessed are you who mourn, for you will be comforted. So, although some people may have experienced more suffering, they have a promise from God that they are going to experience great blessing. So in that way, count yourself poor in that you haven't experienced those things. And so, I mean, I take Jesus's words seriously. I believe that God is in the process of restoring all things, making all things just, and rewarding those who have suffered. So, and yeah, so what do you think about that?
Well, he's taking his sweet time to accomplish that. It's been 2,000 years since he's been on this planet, and I think things are slowly getting better. But again, with each generation passes, if improvement doesn't happen over a generation, then that generation is done and over with. So, it seems like we're repeating some of the same mistakes over and over again. And I don't know, it seems like, for this, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes and so forth, sounds great, but doesn't that only apply to believers, to those who accept Jesus as Lord and Savior and believes on all those Christian metaphysics? I don't, can that be applied to everyone unless you're a universalist?
I'm not a universalist. I do think there are some good, arguments for universalism, but I also think there's quite a bit of strong biblical evidence that the wicked will be destroyed. But I believe that Jesus's salvation is so powerful that it does include people who have not necessarily heard the good news and confessed him as Savior, especially when we consider God's promises to the poor and God's care for the poor throughout the Bible. You see a theme throughout the Bible of God's care for the poor, and like the things that really make God mad. Like, you can just, throughout the Old Testament, God's tirades against people oppressing the poor shows me that the poor they are God's priority. And if I consider that most of the people who have ever lived, right, who have not heard the gospel are, some of the poorest people who ever live, I believe that God's promises for them are still good, that Jesus's salvation is able to extend to them because his salvation is more powerful than Adam and Eve's sin. Nobody needs to know who Adam and Eve are to be affected by the sin that they committed and the death and experience death. And so in the same way, Jesus Christ, his salvation is powerful enough to bring life to all people. Doesn't mean every single person will be saved, because there are some people who are wicked and don't want to turn from their wickedness. But it does include people who are, poor, and who have thought God, maybe not heard the gospel. So I am not a universalist, but I'm an inclusivist.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time today. I feel like there's a lot more. I don't know. There were so many points that you made that I wanted to respond to, and I don't know if I got to respond to everything, but I don't know where to go from here. So were there any final points you wanted to make?
No, I don't think so. We've gone an hour and a half, so I think that's pretty
Okay.
good.
All right. Well, thanks, Floyd. And again, thank you everyone who participated. God bless you all.